A leather journal sat on my porch Tuesday morning, open to a private page. It belonged to Charlotte, the 24-year-old neighbor who'd lived next door for 8 months. She brings me cookies sometimes and asks for help with small repairs, and I've always thought of her as just friendly. The page said, "If I confess my love, I'll lose him forever." I sat at my kitchen table for an hour after that, the coffee going cold, not knowing what I was supposed to do with what I'd seen. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 39 years old, and I run a small handyman business out of a converted garage behind my house on Maple Street. It's not a neighborhood that makes the news. Quiet sidewalks, old trees, mailboxes that lean a little to the left. I fix leaky faucets for retired teachers. I hang shelves for young couples who just bought their first place. I replace rotted porch boards and patch drywall and carry heavy dressers up narrow stairs. The work keeps my hands busy and my mind quiet, and that's always been enough for me. I start most days at 6 in the morning, pulling tools from the pegboard in my garage, loading the old Ford truck with boards and caulk, and the kind of patience you need when you're explaining to a retired accountant why you can't just nail a shelf into drywall without a stud. I come home around 5, sometimes 6, and I eat whatever's in the fridge standing at the counter, and I fall asleep by 9:30 with the radio playing low. It's not a life that impresses anyone, but it's mine, and I built it with my own hands, and I thought it was finished. I bought this house 6 years ago with my wife, back when I still thought I knew how to build a life with someone. She left 3 years ago, said I was too quiet, said she couldn't grow old in a house where the only sound was a man sanding wood in the garage. I didn't fight her on it. I helped her load the moving truck, and I watched her drive away, and I went back to the kitchen table where my coffee was still warm. That was the last time I let myself need anybody. Charlotte moved into the small blue house next door 8 months ago. I noticed the moving truck first, and then I noticed her. She was trying to carry a mattress up the porch steps by herself, and the thing was sliding sideways like it had a mind of its own. I set down the panel sander I was holding and walked over without thinking. She had red hair that caught the afternoon light, and she was wearing an old pair of jeans with paint on the knees. She looked up at me and smiled like I was doing her a favor just by existing. I carried the mattress inside for her. She tried to offer me $5, and I told her neighbors don't pay neighbors for simple things. She made cookies that weekend, chocolate chip with walnuts, and she brought them over in a tin she'd found at a thrift store. I ate 2 of them standing at my kitchen counter, and I put the tin in the cabinet above the stove, where I keep things I don't know what to do with. After that, we fell into a rhythm that didn't need naming. She'd wave from her garden when I pulled the truck into the driveway. She'd ask if I had a spare hour to look at a door that wouldn't close right, or a window that stuck, or a light switch that sparked. I'd bring my toolbox over, and she'd make coffee that was too sweet for my taste, and we'd talk about the weather, or the neighborhood, or the tomatoes she was trying to grow in raised beds that leaned worse than the mailboxes. I told myself it was just neighborly. I told myself the warmth I felt when I saw her was just the relief of having someone nearby who didn't look at me like I was broken. One Saturday in April, she called me over to help hang a mirror. It was an old thing, heavy, with a gilded frame she'd found at a garage sale. We spent 20 minutes trying to find a stud in the wall, and she kept handing me the stud finder upside down, and every time it beeped, she'd jump like we'd discovered something alive in the plaster. By the time we got the mirror hung, we were both laughing, and she made iced tea that was so sweet it made my teeth ache, and we sat on her porch steps watching the afternoon turn gold. She told me about the bookstore where she worked, about the customers who came in looking for novels and left with self-help books, about the poetry section nobody browsed except teenagers in love. I told her about Mrs. Patterson's terrier, which had dug up 3 flower beds on the street. She laughed, and the sound of it settled into me like something I'd been missing without knowing it. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice things. The way her shoulders softened when she laughed. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on something I was explaining. The way she looked at my hands when I was working. Not like she was impressed, but like she was trying to read something in the scars and the calluses. I'd catch myself watching her from my kitchen window when she was watering her plants in the early morning, the hose in one hand and coffee in the other, her hair still messy from sleep. I'd turn away before she could look up and catch me. I was 39. She was 24. Those numbers sat between us like a fence I wasn't allowed to climb. The journal was sitting on the top step of my porch when I stepped outside for the paper that Tuesday morning. The sky was the color of old denim, and the air was heavy with humidity that hadn't broken yet. It was bound in worn brown leather with a cord wrapped around it, the kind of cord Charlotte sometimes used to tie her hair back when she was gardening. The wind must have caught it, or she'd set it down and forgotten it, because it was open to a page near the middle, the paper slightly curled at the edges from humidity. I picked it up first because I thought it was mine. I have a notebook I keep in the truck for measurements and supply lists, and for a second I thought I'd dropped it on my way in last night. But the leather was softer than anything I owned, and the pages were thin, almost translucent, the kind of paper you find in stores that still sell real stationery. I turned it over, and there was her name written in the inside cover in the same small handwriting I recognized from the note she'd once left on my windshield after a snowstorm. Charlotte Brennan, please move your truck by Thursday for plowing. A small heart drawn beneath the words, like she'd done it without thinking, the way people doodle while they're on the phone. I shouldn't have read it, I know that. A man's private thoughts belong to him, and a woman's private words belong to her, and the space between those two truths is where decency lives. I told myself I'd close it. I'd knock on her door and hand it back and never say a word about what the cover looked like on the inside. But the page was already open, and the handwriting was right there, small and cramped and urgent, and my eyes found the words before my conscience could stop them. The entry was dated 3 nights ago. She'd written it after dark, I could tell, because the letters slanted harder toward the bottom of the page, like she'd been tired or emotional. The first line stopped me cold. If I confess my love, I'll lose him forever. I read it 3 times before the meaning settled into me. I kept reading. He's 39, I'm 24. To him, I'm just the neighbor girl who brings cookies and asks for help with shelves. But to me, he's the only man I've ever met who makes silence feel safe. He listens like he's actually hearing. He fixes things without needing to be thanked. He looks at me, and I don't feel like a body passing through a room. I feel like a person who matters. I set the journal down on the porch railing like it was hot. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them flat against my thighs to make them stop. I looked across the lawn at her house, the blue paint fading in the morning sun, the curtains still drawn in her bedroom window. She was probably still asleep. She had no idea that her private heart was sitting on my porch, wide open, telling me things I wasn't prepared to know. I picked it up again. I told myself I'd just check if there was an address or phone number inside, some practical reason to keep holding it. But I turned the page, and then I turned another, and I kept turning until I was inside her private world, reading words that were never meant for my eyes. The leather was warm from the sun, and the pages smelled faintly like her lavender shampoo, and every word felt like a confession whispered into a room where I shouldn't have been standing. I read the entire journal that morning. I didn't mean to. I kept telling myself I'd stop after one more page, after one more entry, after I understood enough to know what I was dealing with. But her words pulled me forward the way a good story pulls you. Except this wasn't fiction. This was my life, seen through eyes I'd never realized were watching so closely. The earliest entry was from March, 3 weeks after she moved in. He carried my mattress up the stairs like it weighed nothing. He didn't look at me the way men usually look at me. He just looked at the mattress, and then at the wall. And then he asked if I needed anything else before he left. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I needed someone to stay for 5 minutes and make the empty house feel less loud. But I just said, "Thank you," and he nodded, and he walked back across the lawn. I watched him go. I don't know why. An entry from April hit me harder than I expected. I watched him repair my porch railing today. He measured the board twice before he cut it. He ran his thumb along the grain like he was reading it. His forearms when he works, the veins, the old scar across his thumb. I wanted to touch it and ask where it came from, but I didn't have the right. I don't have the right to anything about him. I'm just the girl next door who can't hammer a nail straight. The May entry was different. The handwriting was tighter, angrier. Mrs. Patterson was walking her dog past my house this morning. She stopped to tell me what a sweet girl I am. And then she said, "You want to be careful around that divorced man next door. Someone should warn you about men like that." I smiled and nodded because that's what you do. But I wanted to scream. Daniel isn't men like that. He's the only person on this street who looks at me and sees a person instead of a problem or a possibility. There was an entry from mid-May I almost skipped, but something about the smudged ink made me keep reading. I made him iced tea today. I put in too much sugar on purpose because I wanted to see if he'd tell me. He didn't. He drank the whole glass and said it was good. He was lying, I could tell. But he lied because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. I keep thinking about that. A man who would rather drink terrible tea than make a woman feel small. There was an entry from early June that I read twice. He came over to fix the bathroom fan today. It took 10 minutes. We talked for an hour. He told me about the time he rewired his mother's whole house in a weekend because her electrician fell through. He said it like it was nothing, like anyone would do that for their mother. I wanted to tell him that most people wouldn't do that for anyone. But I just nodded, and he packed his tools, and he left. I stood in the bathroom for 5 minutes after he was gone, looking at the fan spinning like it was the most interesting thing in the world. The June entry made me set the journal down and walk to the window. I tried to date someone my age last week, a guy from the bookstore where I work. He talked about himself for 2 hours over dinner and never asked me one question about my life. I came home and cried on my porch because I know Daniel would have asked. I know he would have listened. I know he would have cared about the answer. And that made me cry harder, because knowing that doesn't change anything. He's 39. I'm 24. Those numbers are a wall I can't climb, and every day I try not to look at it, the wall gets a little higher. I sat back in the kitchen chair and looked at my hands. The scar across my thumb, the one she'd noticed. Table saw, age 19, the reason I measured twice. I'd never thought of it as something a person could love about me. I'd never thought of my careful, slow way of working as anything but necessary. But she'd seen it, and she'd understood it, and she'd loved me for it, without my ever knowing. The journal sat open on the table, and the morning light moved across the pages like it was reading too, and I felt something crack open in my chest that I'd sealed up 3 years ago. By noon, I knew every page. By 1 o'clock, she knocked on my door to ask if I'd seen her journal. She was wearing a yellow dress that day, the sort with small flowers on it, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that left her neck bare. She looked anxious, but she tried to hide it, pressing her lips together in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She thought she'd left the journal at the park, or maybe the coffee shop where she sometimes wrote on her lunch break. She asked if I'd seen it, and I lied for the first time in years. I told her I hadn't seen it. I kept my voice even. I put my hands in my pockets so she wouldn't see them shaking. She believed me. I could see the relief soften her shoulders, followed by the worry of still not knowing where it was. She bit her lower lip the way she did when she was thinking hard, and I had to look past her at the oak tree in her front yard because I suddenly couldn't look at her mouth without remembering what she'd written about my silence, feeling safe. "I must have left it at Brood," she said. "I was there yesterday writing during my break. I hope someone turned it in. It's stupid, but I write everything in that journal. My whole life is in there." I nodded. I kept my face still. But her words landed in my stomach like a stone. Her whole life was in there, and I had it, and I was standing on my porch, lying to her about it. "Would you mind looking at my kitchen faucet while you're here?" she asked. "It's been dripping for 3 days, and I can't figure out if it's the washer or something worse." I should have said no. I should have told her I had another appointment, or that I was waiting on a delivery, or any of the small lies people use to create space. But I couldn't make myself do it. I was standing on her porch with her journal hidden in my truck, and her whole life hidden in my chest, and the idea of walking away felt physically impossible. I said sure. I followed her inside, and the house smelled like her shampoo and the lavender candles she kept on the windowsill, and every step felt loaded with double meaning. I got down on the floor and slid under the sink, and she stood above me, handing me tools from the drawer, her bare feet inches from my shoulder. I could smell her shampoo from where I lay. I kept my eyes on the pipe and told myself to concentrate on the washer. "Are you going to the neighborhood barbecue this weekend?" she asked while I worked. "Maybe," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, too careful, too flat. "I'd like it if you did," she said. "It's more fun when you're there. I mean, when there's someone to talk to who actually listens." I tightened the connection and tested the handle. The drip slowed, but didn't stop. I told her I needed a part from the hardware store and that I'd come back tomorrow to finish it. It was a lie. The washer just needed another quarter turn, but I needed to leave before I said something I couldn't take back, before I looked up at her from the floor and told her I'd read every word she'd written about me. I packed my tools and walked back across the lawn. The journal was hidden in the toolbox in the bed of my truck, wrapped in an old shop rag, heavier than a tool had any right to be. I didn't look at her house again that day. I went inside and sat in the dark living room, and I tried to remember what my life had felt like before I knew that Charlotte loved me. I made it 2 more days. Then the storm came on a Friday evening, the kind of summer thunderstorm that rolls in fast and hard and turns the sky green before it breaks. I was sitting on my porch with a beer, watching the wind tear through the oak branches, when the first crack of lightning split the air 1/2 mile east. The lights in my house flickered once and went black. I looked across the lawn and saw her windows go dark at the same time. I lit candles in the living room and sat on the couch, listening to the rain hammer the roof. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps on my porch steps, and then a knock that was softer than the thunder, but unmistakable. I opened the door, And Charlotte was standing there in an oversized gray sweater that swallowed her hands, her hair damp from running through the rain, holding a flashlight that she wasn't turning on. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know it's late. Storms scare me. I know that's childish. I know I'm 24 and I should be past this. But the dark feels different when you're alone in it." I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." She sat on one end of the couch, and I sat on the other, and the candles on the coffee table threw warm amber light against the walls. The rain against the windows sounded like someone drumming their fingers, impatient. She pulled her knees up under the sweater and wrapped her arms around them, and she looked so small and so real that I had to remind myself why I wasn't supposed to reach for her. "I moved here because I wanted quiet," she said, not looking at me. "My mother wanted me to stay in the city. She said I was wasting my 20s in a small town where nothing happens. She said I'd be invisible here. I told her that was the point. I wanted to be invisible for a while. I wanted to figure out who I was when nobody was watching." I watched the candlelight move across her face. "Did you figure it out?" "Not even close," she said, and she laughed, but it was a sad sound. "I thought being invisible would feel like freedom. It just feels like loneliness with a better name." I don't know why I told her about my marriage. Maybe it was the dark. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the fact that I'd read her journal and I owed her some piece of my own hidden heart. I told her about my ex-wife, about the 3 years of silence since she left, about the accusation that I was too quiet to build a life with. I told her I'd believed it for a while, that I'd accepted the label and worn it like a coat that didn't fit. "She was wrong," Charlotte said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty she used when she told me her tomatoes weren't getting enough sun. "You're not too quiet. You're just careful. There's a difference." The conversation turned. She asked why I never dated, and I told her the truth, that I'd stopped looking because I'd stopped believing anyone would want what I had to offer. She asked why she never brought anyone over, and she was quiet for a long moment before she said, "Because the only person I want to bring over is someone I can't have." I almost said it then. I almost told her I'd read the journal. I almost crossed the space between us on the couch and took her hand and told her the wall she'd written about wasn't as high as she thought. But the candle flickered, and she looked at me, and the moment hung in the air like a held breath, and neither of us exhaled. She stood up, and I thought she was leaving, but she sat back down, closer this time, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm through the sweater. The storm passed, the power stayed off, but something had shifted between us, and we both felt it. I almost reached for her hand. She almost leaned her head against my shoulder. Neither of us moved. The gap held. The rain slowed to a drizzle and then to nothing. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the old radiator and the sound of our breathing. She turned her head slightly, and her hair brushed against my shoulder, and I felt the contact like a current running through me. The power came back on at midnight. The lights buzzed overhead, harsh and sudden, and we both blinked like we'd been woken from a dream we'd wanted to stay inside. She stood up slowly, and she looked at me for a long moment, and I thought she might say something. I thought I might say something. Neither of us did. She walked to the door, and I followed her, and I watched her cross the lawn in the dark, her sweater swallowing her frame, until she disappeared inside her own house. She went home, and I sat in my dark living room for another hour, knowing I'd just let the most important moment of my life pass me by. The next morning, reality seeped back in like water through a cracked foundation. I was under my truck in the driveway, changing the oil, when Mrs. Patterson wandered over with her terrier yapping at the end of a pink leash. She stood at the edge of my driveway in her housecoat and smiled the kind of smile that isn't meant to be kind. "That Charlotte is such a sweet girl," she said. "I do hope she finds a nice young man her own age, someone who can keep up with her, someone with a future ahead of him. It would be such a shame to see her waste her youth on something inappropriate." I kept my hands steady on the wrench. I didn't look at her. I didn't respond. But the comment landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I finished the oil change, and I washed my hands, and I told myself that Mrs. Patterson was just a bored old woman with too much time and too little charity. But the seed was planted, and seeds have a way of growing in the dark places of your mind where reason can't reach them. Later that afternoon, I saw Charlotte on her porch talking to a young man in a brown delivery uniform. He was handing her a package, and she was laughing at something he said, and he was leaning against her doorframe in a way that suggested he had nowhere else to be. Jealousy hit me like a physical thing. It was foreign and unwelcome and completely undeniable. I went back inside and closed my own door harder than I needed to. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked at my reflection in the window. I saw a man with gray starting at his temples, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, with hands that looked older than the rest of him. I realized the age gap wasn't just her fear, it was mine too. I was afraid I was too weathered, too set in my ways, too old to make her happy. I was afraid that 5 years from now, she'd wake up and wonder what she was doing with a man who went to bed at 9:30 and woke up at 5 and thought a good Saturday was spent sanding a cabinet. That fear became a voice I couldn't silence. It told me that Charlotte deserved someone who could take her dancing without his knee acting up, someone who understood the music she listened to and the shows she watched and the apps on her phone, someone who hadn't already lived half a life with someone else and failed at it. The voice made sense. The voice was reasonable. The voice was killing me. So I did the cowardly thing. I started avoiding her. I turned off my porch light in the evenings when I saw her outside watering her plants. I stopped waving back when she waved at me from her driveway. The one morning she called out good morning as I was getting in my truck, I pretended I didn't hear her. I started taking the long way around the block when I drove home, just to avoid passing her house. She noticed. Of course she noticed. The cookies stopped. The requests for help with small repairs stopped. A week went by, and then another, and both houses stayed quiet. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself I was protecting her from a mistake she didn't know she was making. But the quiet in my house felt different now. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like the absence of something I'd already grown to need. I told myself I'd keep holding the line. Then I found the folded paper tucked under my windshield wiper on a Wednesday morning, and I understood exactly how much I'd hurt her. The note was written in her small, careful handwriting. "I don't know what I did, but I miss my neighbor. C." I read it 3 times standing in my driveway. The sun was just coming up. The paper was damp with dew. I looked across the lawn at her house, at the dark windows, at the life I'd been shutting out because I was afraid. I folded the note and put it in my pocket, and I drove to the grocery store, and I bought chicken and vegetables and bread, and I knocked on her door that evening with a paper bag in my hand. "I'm cooking dinner," I said, "if you want to eat it with me." She looked surprised, then cautious. Then she smiled, And it was a smaller smile than I was used to, but it was real. I'd like that. I cooked the way my mother taught me. Simple food done right. Chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, bread warmed in the oven. The kitchen filled with smells that made the house feel less empty than it had in years. We ate at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat 3 days earlier reading her heart. The same table where I'd let my coffee go cold while her words rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own loneliness. "This is good," she said. "Really good. I didn't know you could cook." My mother believed that if you can build a cabinet, you can build a meal. Same principles. Measure twice, cut once. Don't rush. She laughed, and it was the first time I'd heard her laugh in weeks, and the sound of it made something loosen in my chest. We talked while we ate. She told me about a customer at the bookstore who came in every Thursday looking for the same out-of-print mystery novel, and how she'd finally tracked down a copy from a store in Oregon. I told her about the time I'd rebuilt a staircase for a couple who'd bought a 100-year-old house, and how the wife had cried when she saw it finished because her grandmother had had the same banister design. The conversation moved the way a good conversation moves, from one subject to the next without forcing it, each topic leading naturally into the one that followed. It felt like breathing. She asked about the scar on my thumb. I told her about the table saw, age 19, the reason I measure twice. She listened the way she always did, like the answer mattered, like she was filing it away in some private collection of things she knew about me. Then she told me about the journal. Not everything, just that she wrote because she was afraid to say things out loud, because paper didn't judge you, and because sometimes putting words down was the only way to know if they were true. "What are you afraid of?" I asked her. She looked at me for a long moment. The candle on the table between us flickered. "That the people I care about see me as temporary. That I'm someone they can enjoy for a little while, but not someone they'd choose to keep." I understood that. I told her about my ex-wife calling me boring. I told her about the 3 years of believing it, of accepting that I was the kind of man women tolerated but didn't stay for. I told her I'd been afraid ever since that anyone who really saw me would leave. "I see you," Charlotte said. She said it quietly, without drama, the way she'd say the tomatoes needed more water. "And I'm still here." We washed the dishes together. Our hands kept touching in the warm, soapy water, and neither of us pulled away. I walked her to the door when we were done, and she turned to say goodnight, and I didn't step back. We stood close enough that I could see the small freckle on her left cheekbone that I'd never noticed before. Close enough that I could smell her shampoo, lavender and something else, something that smelled like sunlight. She left that night without either of us saying what we really meant. But 3 days later, the journal was back on my porch, and this time, I knew she'd left it there on purpose. The journal sat on the top step just like before, but this time it was closed, wrapped with a thin green ribbon that marked a new page near the end. I didn't hesitate. I picked it up, I sat on the porch swing, and I opened it to the ribbon. The new entry was dated last night. I know he read it. I see it in his eyes now, the way he looks at me like he's seeing something he didn't before. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of never knowing. Tomorrow, I'm going to leave this journal on his porch. If he reads this new page, he'll know exactly how I feel. If he doesn't, I'll have my answer. I turned the page. The handwriting was different here, bolder. The letters stood taller on the line, like she'd pressed the pen harder. I'm not afraid of the age difference anymore. I'm afraid of never trying. Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm on my porch right now, waiting to see if you'll come over. I'm sitting in the old rocking chair, and I'm wearing the blue dress, and I'm holding my breath. Please come. Or please don't, and let me know that way too. Either way, I can't live in the middle anymore. I looked up from the page. She was on her porch, just like she'd said, sitting in the old wooden rocking chair that had been there when she moved in, wearing the blue dress with the small white buttons down the front. She wasn't rocking. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands clasped tight in her lap, watching my house. I set the journal down on the swing. I walked across the lawn in my socks. The grass was wet from morning dew, and the sun was just starting to warm the air. My heart was beating harder than it had any right to beat, and I kept my eyes on hers because I was afraid that if I looked away, I might lose my nerve and turn around. She stood up when she saw me coming. Her hands were still clasped, and I could see from 10 feet away that they were shaking. The blue dress moved slightly in the breeze, and the morning light caught the buttons down the front, and she looked like every hope I'd been too afraid to name. I stopped at the bottom of her porch steps. I held up the journal in one hand. "I read it," I said. My voice was steady. Every word. She goes very still. The morning light catches the edge of her hair, and for a moment, neither of us moves. "I was afraid," she says. Her voice is quiet, but it doesn't break. "I'm still afraid." I climb the steps. I'm close enough to touch her now, and I don't yet. I want to give her the space to run if she needs to. I want her to know this is her choice, not something I'm taking. "You won't lose me," I say. "I'm too old to play games, Charlotte. I'm too tired to pretend I don't want you here. I read your journal 3 weeks ago, and I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee, and I tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing by staying away. But the right thing doesn't feel like this. The right thing doesn't feel like a house that's too quiet." She reaches for my hand. I take it. My thumb brushes the inside of her wrist, and I feel her pulse racing, and I know mine is doing the same. "What about the neighbors?" she asks. "What about what people say?" I look at her. I don't look away. Let them talk. I've spent 3 years listening to silence. I'd rather listen to you. She steps into me. I put my arms around her, and she fits against my chest like she'd been designed to be there. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's right. I can feel her heart beating against my chest. Or maybe it's mine. I can't tell anymore. And it doesn't matter. She turns her face up to look at me, and her eyes are wet, but she's smiling. "You're shaking," she says. "So are you," I say. "I know. I've been shaking since the day I moved in." We stand on the porch while the sun comes up over the oak trees. 2 people who've been alone, choosing not to be. We still live on Maple Street. The neighbors still talk. Charlotte still writes in her journal, but now she reads me the entries out loud. Some mornings, she leaves it on my porch on purpose. I always read what she wrote. The age difference never went away. We just stopped letting it sit between us.